Hateful journalists have been mocking gamers and the censorship of Stellar Blade. Few games in recent years have generated as much unhinged behaviour from journalists as that of Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade is the gift that keeps on giving, as it's seemingly continuously highlighting the rampant, deluded perspective of the world held within the online game journalism sphere. Examples of this we have already covered include the editor of IGN France correlating Stellar Blade's character design with women ending their own lives, as well as a writer from TheGamer.com who worked as a television producer for Adam Ruins Everything, who wrote a hit piece abusing gamers with childish name-calling. With the game now available in stores and drama continues to unfold, today we will not only be discussing the most recent controversies, but most spicy of all, analysing the hot takes of yet another editor of a huge gaming news site and, extremely annoyingly, for me at least, discussing the awful brand new Kotaku censorship circus article, which wasn't published until I had already finished writing the original script for this video. So please forgive me if any part of this feels a little disjointed, as I've had to rejig sections to fit in brand new important information. I am Lady Decade, join me as we continue to cover the ever-evolving Stellar Blade twaddle. So if you're into twaddle like this, subscribe for plenty more twaddle in the future. The internet, a place where people watch twaddle about twaddle. Stellar Blade is now here and has been selling at an astonishing rate, shifting over 1 million units in just the first 24 hours. While positively received, unsurprisingly liking the build-up to the game's release, not all news stories surrounding the game have been wholly positive. Amongst the latest round of gossip was a series of articles being published about graffiti being removed from the game that some felt could be interpreted as unintentionally racist. However, others feel additional censorship has been implemented into Stellar Blade, which has received a much more adverse reaction from certain gamers. Examples of this, as demonstrated by this tweet, include Eve's holiday bunny outfit being altered to include a boob apron to remove the plunging V-neck on the design.
If you wear a boob apron, then you can look like a librarian, a receptionist, or someone who's allergic to parties. Why would anybody invent something to ruin a man's happiness and take away his dreams?
Aside from the inclusion of an unwanted titkerchief in the game in a throwback to the Lieberman attacks on Mortal Kombat, layers of blood splatter have been removed from the game too. In the United States, this is an M-rated game, leading many people to be perplexed as to why any content like this would be removed from the game, particularly when the Stellar Blade Twitter account promoted it just 1 week ago on the 21st of April as being a game that would offer the same uncensored version in all countries. While some believe, and perhaps rightly so, that the changes which have been included are incredibly minor, others believe that, on principle, it was the completely wrong thing to do based on the promise that the game would be completely uncensored. One of these principle-driven individuals, Mark Kern, former World of Warcraft team lead, is so against the altering of Stellar Blade that he has started a popular petition on change.org to get the version of the title many gamers feel they were promised, and thus pre-ordered and spent their hard-earned money on. Kern would outline why his petition matters, as well as an 8-step plan to uncensor the game. Despite being launched just 3 days before the time of writing this video, the petition has already amassed over 44,000 signatures, with that number changing by the time this video was edited. Mark on his petition writes, Stellar Blade is a phenomenal new game they just launched on PlayStation 5 worldwide, but it has a problem. The content has been censored from the original trailer version posted by Sony. We as gamers want this content back. We relied on it, we made the game the #1 pre-order worldwide because of it, and this is the true game we want. Stellar Blade is more than a game, it has become a cultural beacon for freedom of expression in a time where game publishers like Sony are censoring games more than ever. Stellar Blade was a breath of fresh air, and gamers rallied behind it because it meant things were changing, getting better, and the voice of creative freedom was ringing loud and clear. But for reasons unknown, the game was censored, changes were made. What we received after our good faith purchase was not the game as advertised. We believe in the game, we believe in Shift Up, and we are asking to get to the game we believed in. Revert the censorship changes, patch the game, and you will find that even more gamers will join you and support you. All gamers can help by signing this petition. It will be printed in Korea and delivered in Korea to Shift Up offices, and physically printed and delivered to Sony PlayStation North America offices. Spread this petition on social media with the Free Stellar Blade hashtag. As for this statement, although quite short, there are a few things to unpack. Firstly, I want to address the point where Mark refers to the game as a cultural beacon for freedom of expression. Playing devil's advocate, you can argue that the term sounds very poetic and over the top, and at the end of the day, is it really? It's a video game with a certain target demographic in mind, produced to make as much money as possible. That being said, Mark actually does have a point. The phrase "a cultural beacon for freedom of expression" typically refers to an entity, institution, city, or country that serves as a prominent symbol or example of supporting and promoting free speech and artistic freedom. This could be a place or organisation known for its encouragement of open dialogue, diverse opinions, artistic experimentation, and, most importantly, resistance against censorship. The fact that only last week the Stellar Blade Twitter account was building hype for the game, promoting it around being uncensored in all countries, is proof of this. Regarding what Mark Kern says about games becoming increasingly more censored than ever, there was certainly a time in the 80s and 90s when video games were heavily censored, particularly when being released on Nintendo platforms. There are countless examples of this ridiculousness, such as poison being removed from Final Fight so you can't be seen hitting a woman, blood being changed to green in Mortal Kombat, and all Christian symbology being removed from series like Castlevania. There's always been mass censorship in video games. This is nothing new. However, based on the way that Stellar Blade was promoted, that's where the problem arises. The point that I assume Mark is trying to make is that games are now being censored in pathetic ways that no one would even have considered in the 90s, with even retro games being retconned to remove content in fear someone might get triggered. Examples of this include the Japanese imperial flag being removed from the bathhouse stage in the most recent iteration of Street Fighter 2, and even more pathetically, some questionable dialogue changes in the Switch version of Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door. The craziest of these are some of Bowser's lines being altered to prevent him from fat-shaming his underlings. Yes, you heard me right. A villain in a video game is being prevented from saying certain things in case they are perceived to be too mean. Personally, I feel that if you're offended by what Bowser said, then in his words, I order you to do some sit-ups, Tubby. Honestly, it's such a silly and harmless line to remove. So, bearing in mind that the game was promoted using anti-censorship rhetoric and nonsense like what's going on in Paper Mario at the moment, it's fair that some people feel a bit aggrieved as they don't feel they have been delivered the product they have been sold. This is one of those situations where, although what has been changed, in my own opinion at least, is really very minor, I understand the principle and moral drive behind consumers being unhappy to allow game publishers to pull the rug from under them. People are angry because they feel duped by the marketing. A lot of people have been very vocal in their support for a game, which has then proceeded to mug them off. So after I had finished writing this video, it transpired that Kotaku felt so irritated by Mark Kern's petition that they swiftly proceeded to publish a massive hit piece on not just his petition, but also his personal character and integrity. So just to clarify, I wrote the rest of this video before this hit piece was even released. This part I'm adding about the Kotaku article is just more fuel being chucked on a fire that was already a raging inferno of game journalist propaganda and gaslighting. Senior reporter Ethan Gatch has published a controversial article titled "The Stellar Blade Circus Explained." And when I say Stellar Blade Circus Explained, I guess he means a curated version of events that fails to document any of the ongoing game journalist gaslighting we have week by week been spotlighting on here. The false equivalences drawn between the character's design and self-deletion, along with the death threat Mark Kern has since received, which predates the entirety of this video and most certainly this hit piece, which has been designed to destroy his character. But more on that later, as this script has been written in a strange order. Ethan Gatch describes the Free Stellar Blades petition as surprisingly complicated and kind of sad. Then, in just the second paragraph of his article, resorts to name-calling, reducing Mark Kern to, in his words, an online gamer angry grifter. From the trend I have noticed with game journalists and fringe radicals in general recently, everyone I disagree with is a grifter is the new everyone I disagree with is literally Hitler. Just for clarity, I'm not comparing anyone I speak about today to Hitler, I'm just comparing the phrases. Purposefully missing the point and proving there truly is a culture war going on at the moment, the Kotaku article overlooks all the reasons we have been covering as to why the Stellar Blades discourse has been winding people up and instead focuses on framing those who are excited about Stellar Blades being an uncensored experience as being the lowest dregs of society. He accuses a certain contingent of trying to create a Gamergate 2.0, with Kern being one of the names he deems responsible, despite completely ignoring all of the purposeful gaslighting coming from their side that's inciting the majority of the animosity in the first place, including doubling down by relinking this debacle with their previous dishonest article that tried to rewrite history regarding the Sweet Baby Inc. drama. Everything politically on Kotaku is extremely one-sided and extremely hollow. What makes it funnier is that later in the article, Kotaku poke fun at the posted videos on the Stellar Blades petition, referring to them as so awkward they seem like a high-level caricature of the entire manufactured controversy. Which is highly amusing, as it was only last week on this channel that I noted that the editor of Kotaku, Alyssa McCanty, looks and behaves like a caricature of a left-leaning game journalist herself. Are they seriously not noticing this? Are they not looking in the mirror and perhaps considering...
Are we the baddies?
Just to be clear, I do not believe in goodies and baddies in real life. That's confined to fairy tales. I believe there is right and wrong on both sides, and that there is more than one set of defined caricatures in this narrative, and one seems to be much less self-aware than the other. Basically, the more weeks this discourse is going on, the more that both sides are doubling down and, to some degree, reaching continually further to make their curated narratives make sense. What makes this even worse is that if there is one thing the journalists are right about, is that there are thousands of people floating about online who aren't very eloquent when it comes to making the points they want to make about their distaste for the Stellar Blade censorship and ongoing, frankly, bullying from gaming news sites mocking their opinions and perceived lack of understanding. These journalists are more often than not university educated, are trained writers, have massive platforms and, to a degree, can eloquently put their point across. Certainly better than the unwashed masses they seem to look down their noses at, who aren't trained writers defending themselves to the best of their abilities in comment sections. This is an extra layer that makes a lot of this behaviour from game journalists so abhorrent, as firstly, they are clearly educated enough that they should know better, and secondly, they are writing one-sided, biased takes with the pure intention of trying to discredit people. I suppose I'm doing this to some extent myself, but at least I'm self-aware enough to bloody admit it. And for the record, I'm not particularly educated and didn't go to university. Maybe this is why I'm staunchly centrist, why I can see the good and bad on both sides, and why I feel masses of empathy towards those who are being attacked purely over their tastes in gaming. I guess the situation feels so bad because it's coming across like the university-educated game journalists are essentially punching down, even though the people they're punching down at have some very valid points. Now, this is where the original story I was working on can now resume, as drama from game journalists doesn't stop there. In fact, an editor of the gaming news site GameSpot.com took to X to poke fun at Mark Kern and tens of thousands of other gamers' grievances. Accompanied by screenshots of Mark Kern's Change.org page, Jessica Cogswell states in her tweet, "This is the most unhinged behaviour I've seen in quite some time, and I have a 2-year-old. So, Let me get this straight. She disapproves of tens of thousands of gamers who feel they have been missold a product through what they feel to be false marketing and calls them unhinged for feeling that way, with the cherry on top, comparing those she doesn't agree with to babies. That sounds familiar. Honestly, I don't know where to start with this stupid tweet, as not only is it directly insulting tens of thousands of people, but she's also insulting her own child by alluding to them being unhinged too. I'm a mother of 2 children, currently 3 years old and 5 years old. Both lads at times can be demanding and challenging, but at no point would I refer to their behaviour as being unhinged. They're children, acting like children, so I'm not sure where the dunk is, unless it's her own parenting skills or lack thereof. For the record, I don't know this lady and I have no clue how she parents, and that's no one's business in any way, shape or form, but that doesn't detract from her tweets being unhinged and making little sense whatsoever, even if it was just a rubbish joke attempting to poke fun at the people she doesn't like. When you think about it, it's terrible that people are willing to tweet every random ridiculous thought that pops into their head, no matter how stupid, and it becomes even more alarming when you consider that this woman is an editor of GameSpot. If she can't even handle sending out appropriate tweets that make sense, how can we possibly have any trust or confidence in the outlet that has empowered her? John F. Trent of thatsparkplace.com would highlight that Cogswell's unprovoked attack on gamers is not an isolated incident, and she has years of tweets offering up similarly combative takes and fringe ideas. Collating some of her outrageous tweets, Trent spotlights that as recently as the 29th of March of this year, this professional game journalist would laugh at who she refers to as incel gamer dudes, expecting games to have hot characters and characters representative of them at the same time. I don't know about you lot, but I haven't noticed a correlation between the sorts of people who crave a more idealistic style of design in video games with those who are complaining that video games need more representation. Again, it's that typical example of game journalists gaslighting, making points that don't actually exist. After evidently being rebuked in her replies, she replied calling them weirdos and telling them to get a life. Since her previous tweets didn't make sense, she would double down, mocking those who said to her they didn't even ask for representation, vindictively stating, "Every other f***ing time your collective tweets about how woke characters and women are in every role and you miss cis-het white men being allowed in things." Sadly, the way Twitter is designed is to encourage a smooth brain discourse so that people can argue back and forth with one another using limited characters. It incites people to shoot from the hip rather than taking time to think and respond eloquently. The website is basically imbecile battle royale. There are no winners. There are only people trying to make each other look foolish, with ultimately no one winning and everyone looking like heads. Unfortunately for this GameSpot editor, she now has a documented record of making a fool of herself with low-effort takes and unsubstantiated claims and statements. So going back to that last tweet accusing other people of complaining about woke characters and missing cis-hetero white men being allowed in things, she bases her argument by drawing a false equivalence that gamers are asking for representation when that couldn't be further from the case. Online, sadly, most people seem incapable or, at the very least, can't be bothered to try to put across their opinions and beliefs properly. But I should imagine that what the people want, that she's referring to, is not to see themselves represented, but rather instead when they talk about wokeism and the decrease of characters with certain characteristics in games, what they actually mean is they have concerns over what they perceive as forced diversity or tokenism in entertainment media, including games. They might argue that their criticisms are not about excluding diversity, but are against what they see as artificial or heavy-handed inclusion that prioritizes political correctness over storytelling and character development. What they are often trying to express, albeit often very poorly, is that ensuring every group is represented can sometimes come across at the expense of narrative coherence or authenticity, and they might advocate for a more organic approach to character and story creation, where decisions are driven by the narrative needs rather than external social pressures. On the subject of the word woke, it's not really a word that I like to use, as it's a stupid Americanism that doesn't really seem to have a proper universal meaning. What I have noticed though is that in America, both sides of the political spectrum seem to use that word as a stick to beat each other with. I only ever seem to see it used in bad faith, and is terminology that in the modern day is used in smooth brain arguments of one-upmanship amongst those trying to win the imbecile battle royale. For example, you'll regularly see people who are left-leaning demand others to define woke after they have witnessed someone use it as a pejorative term. This is usually done as a pretext so that they can then dismiss the definition provided, argue that the concept doesn't really exist, or redirect the conversation to focus on perceived inconsistencies in the term's usage. This tactic is often used in debates to challenge the validity or coherence of the term woke, which has evolved to have various connotations depending on the context in which it is used. By asking for a definition, individuals may attempt to expose what they see as a lack of clear and agreed upon meaning, thereby undermining arguments that rely on the term. This strategy can also serve to shift the discussion away from specific criticisms associated with being woke and towards the meta discussion about semantics. Put it this way, on Twitter, on both sides of the political spectrum, their arguments are extremely boring and extremely predictable. They all seem to follow an established script and don't deviate from it. Now, for the sake of pedantry, I found a video recently uploaded by someone who actually commented on one of my recent videos, the Short Fat Otaku. I've only seen a couple of his videos so far, but I've enjoyed them, particularly the one where he actually rather eloquently tries to define the word woke, so if you too would like a better explanation, then check that out. I find the contemporary use of the word woke quite frustrating and choose to avoid it altogether, as it often feels like mere jargon to me. Similarly, you'll seldom hear me use terms like snowflake, social justice warrior, or at the other extreme phrases such as TERF or bigot. I believe these words tend to resemble childish bickering and name-calling more than they contribute to constructive dialogue that leads to meaningful conversation with any kind of positive outcome. Back on the subject of Jessica Cogswell's attacks on gamers, a tirade can be found regarding the term JRPG. In one of the most ignorant exchanges regarding gaming history I've ever seen, agreeing with a fellow game journalist, Hannah Kim, who, if you look at their Twitter, has been looking for work since March of 2023, though they have written for GameSpot and IGN amongst others in the past, claims that the term JRPG was created to otherize an outgroup. See what I mean by these people with partisan views, always using buzz terms when it comes to making fringe takes. The buzzwords are one thing, and we can forgive that, but Hannah Kim goes on one step further and calls the term racist.
Ah, that's racist.
I guess the stereotype rings true. You can't spell ignorant without IGN. So rather than being a normal person and recognising that this is an insane take, Cogswell instead takes it and runs with it, wholeheartedly agreeing never to use the term JRPG again because she feels games should be separated by content rather than the race of who created them. We'll talk more about the term JRPG in a second, but before we get to that, by this absurd logic, does this mean, as someone who has lived in the United Kingdom my whole life, I should not be otherizing and outgrouping American football? Despite there already being an existing sport in this country since Tudor times, I might add, and before the United States even existed, called football. Going one step further than this, are we also not supposed to say that we're going to an Indian restaurant, to a Chinese one, a Greek one, an Italian one, etc.? By the logic of these literal radicals, this seems to be how these people who are affiliated with IGN and GameSpot want us all to be policing our speech. As I always say, they are looking for misery where there is none, they are looking for harm where there is none to be found. As for the term JRPG, yes, it indeed does exist as a way to distinguish nuances between two gaming subgenres. Has anyone ever heard anyone refer to the term JRPG in a derogatory manner before this example? Because this lunacy is new to me. I must not spend enough time online. And to compound this view further, to look at the Japanese gaming industry as an out group in the first place is also ridiculous. Throughout the 80s and 90s, they were the most powerful and influential gaming superpower on Earth, and to this very day, they still remain one of the most dominant national forces in gaming. Japan is both a rich and powerful nation, and in the 80s and 90s, they had the strongest economy on the planet, second only to the US. So this Hana Kim can't even claim the Japanese as being marginalised, another term that these people love to throw around, because, let's be honest, the hardworking people of Japan are not a marginalised group. Amongst the gaming community in general, the term JRPG has mostly been used with reverence. I've never known a single person to hold any kind of negative connotation to that term. These two journalists must have very long arms to be able to make those kinds of reaches. For those innocent people who are using the heinous term JRPG, Cogswell adds that even if you don't mean to use it negatively, you need to think about how it comes across, so you realise it feels a bit ick. Let's be honest, the only people who are going to think something feels a bit ick are the thousands and thousands of people watching this at home, cringing in their seats at the level of ignorance displayed by these takes. Perhaps the most painful reading of all, she has the audacity to add, I think if you're white, please consider thinking before tweeting, actually I don't know that it's racist because, then promptly delete that tweet and listen to the opinions of the people you're putting in the box. Yes, all the millions and millions of crying Japanese people who are terribly sad about the billions of dollars the West have spent on importing their products. They must feel so disrespected and marginalised. Luckily for me in this instance, I'm not white, and I am whom Cogswell would probably refer to as a woman of colour. Maybe this means by her logic I have enough victim points that my voice is deemed valid enough to deserve an opinion in this scenario, but who really knows with these kinds of people? I'm sure they'd find a reason I'm not allowed to say anything, like call me a far-right grifter or a white adjacent or something equally unintelligent. She has loads more tweets and self-loathing takes attached to her account based around race, but one particular tweet is perhaps both noteworthy with regards to current goings on. Going on the attack against gamers once more, she writes, gamers are f***ing bullies and don't even deserve the voices they desperately need to hear. People of colour, especially women working in this industry, have a thicker skin than any one person should need to have, and it sucks that's some prerequisites at this point. Now, what's quite tragic about all of this is that underneath the layers of madness, expletives and insults still lies an element of a good point. However, it's sadly lost under her vitriolic language and communication skills, or lack thereof. Here's the first problem with this post. She sweepingly generalises gamers as a whole as being bullies. Gamers are just people. There are going to be flawed individuals and shady characters across all facets of life. Change the word gamers to any group and you'll see that the issue of bullying isn't unique to gamers but is a problem everywhere. It's unfair and intellectually dishonest to single out gamers when this is a universal human issue that transcends all communities and industries. It's the mass tying of universal issues to terms like gamer or white people, which perpetuates unnecessary division and fuels the identity politics that serve to fragment our society further. This approach overlooks the individual's actions and responsibilities, opting instead for broad generalizations that are both unhelpful and inaccurate. It's essential to address the specifics of behavior and context, rather than assign blame to entire groups based on the actions of a few. However, there is a slither of truth to sometimes even the worst of takes. In this instance, although terribly worded, especially for someone who claims to be a professional editor, women do need a thicker skin working in gaming. This does make sense though. Gaming is a male-dominated hobby, and I feel perhaps even the reason I'm much more drawn to it than many others of my biological sex is because I'm neurodivergent from other women due to having ADHD. I have hyperfocuses that other women don't, and was drawn to gaming even though marketeers at the time weren't trying to target women. Being more educated now, I think looking back, it's because for me it was very sensory and could hold my focus unlike many other things. Being a male-dominated space, the unfortunate byproduct of this is that in all likelihood the majority of negative interactions are going to be with men. That doesn't make it acceptable in any way, shape or form, but it does make sense numbers-wise. Cogswell's following tweet in the same thread about gamers being bullies and therefore placing moral responsibility on only white people stated, "If you're a white person, especially one with a reach, a community or in charge of an outlet, hold your community to higher standards regarding bullying." On this note, then I wonder if publications like the one she works at, GameSpot, IGN or Kotaku are going to hold their staff and communities to a high standard and write a piece covering the abhorrent threats targeting Mark Kern, the man behind the Stellar Blade petition, which alerted me to the existence of Jessica Cogswell in the first place. Considering Cogswell's stance, does this imply that she and her fellow game journalists bear some responsibility for the extreme $20,000 bounty placed on Kern by an individual on Twitter? Personally, I don't believe they do, but this seems to follow the logic she suggests. What we should take from this is that neither side should make broad generalizations about entire groups, and everyone should strive to be more considerate in online interactions. I mean, honestly, we're all going to be dead soon anyway. If you're still here after all of that, it means that my opinions are engaging enough for you to listen to. So, since according to my detractors at least, I'm now a far-right grifter for having a different perspective to them, consider supporting my work over on Patreon. I put a lot of time and attention into these videos. Thank you, Patriots!